Beneath the chandeliers of the Montrose ballroom, winter glittered like mockery. Candlelight trembled against mirrors and jewels, multiplying the laughter of the elegant and the cruel. Music swelled, violins straining to disguise the whispers, but it could not drown them. Lady Eleanor Harcourt, the evening's reluctant curiosity, stood at the edge of that glittering sea of silk and malice, every breath measured as if dignity itself were something she could hold between her fingers and not let slip. Once, her entrance would have drawn admiration. The tilt of her chin, the unstudied grace with which she carried herself, the subtle rebellion of her gaze. Tonight, admiration had curdled into speculation. The ladies' fans fluttered like wings of vultures. The men, some amused, some pitying, pretended not to stare. They all knew the tale, or rather, they knew the version they preferred to believe. That she had refused a baron's proposal, laughed at his declaration, and been found, God forbid, alone with him in the conservatory afterward. Eleanor's mother had pleaded with her not to come. Your presence will only remind them. And my absence, Eleanor had replied quietly, would confirm everything. So she came, wearing ivory silk instead of morning black, her dignity her only armor. The waltz began, a cascade of strings that mocked her stillness. She smiled once, faintly, though it never reached her eyes. Across the room, a figure had just arrived, a man the city had not seen in years. The Duke of Ashbourne, Lord Nathaniel Greyston. His return from the continent was the talk of the season, though most whispered of his scars, both visible and otherwise. He was taller than most men remembered, broader too, his hair dark as the storm that had followed him to the doors of Montrose Hall. His left cheek bore the faintest trace of an old wound, silver beneath the lamplight. And yet it was not the scar that silenced the crowd, it was his eyes a storm contained. Their gazes met briefly, as if the noise around them were an intrusion. Eleanor looked away first, too swiftly, her heart striking against her ribs like a bird desperate for escape. She had never met him, not properly, though she had once seen him from a distance at a charity fete years ago, when she was still naive enough to believe that reputation was built on virtue rather than rumor. Lady Harcourt, a syruped voice intruded, Miss Lillian Price, her former confidante turned chronicler of scandal. How brave of you to appear. One might almost call it defiant. I prefer the word necessary, Eleanor replied. Oh, of course. Lillian's smile gleamed like glass. Necessity, how dreadfully unromantic. Eleanor inclined her head, excused herself, and moved toward the refreshment table, every step a small act of rebellion. Yet her pulse betrayed her. She could feel the eyes, the quiet judgments pressing in. She was nearly trembling when she reached for a glass of punch, and found another hand there first. The Duke's. Forgive me, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, deep, measured, tinged with weariness that felt older than he was. I seem to have interrupted your escape. She froze. My escape? His lips curved faintly. Every soul in this room is fleeing something, Lady Harcourt. Some of us simply do it more gracefully. Her composure faltered. There was no mockery in his tone, only a strange, disarming sympathy. She had expected pity. She found instead something like understanding. They stood for a moment in the hum of the violins, neither moving, the silence between them sharper than any rumor. Then, without quite knowing why, she allowed him to lead her onto the floor. The orchestra shifted, a waltz unfurled like silk. It should have been impossible, her first dance in months. Her partner the most watched man in London, but the world receded. His gloved hand at her waist was steady, his gaze steadying. Around them, whispers multiplied. But for once Eleanor did not care. Do you always invite scandal so effortlessly, Your Grace? She asked, half to test him. Only when it offers a decent conversation, he replied. For the span of that waltz, she almost forgot the stares, the cruel delight of the crowd. She saw instead the gentleness in his restraint, the sorrow behind his poise. When the music slowed, their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed, a recognition of equal exile. But the moment shattered as swiftly as it had formed. Lillian Price's laughter sliced through the hush. Oh dear, she said too loudly. One ought to warn the Duke that his partner's favors come with a reputation. A ripple of laughter followed. Nervous, delighted, venomous. Eleanor stiffened, color rising to her cheeks. The Duke's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Lillian made a theatrical stumble, her fan catching the edge of Eleanor's gown. The sound of tearing silk rang out, clear as a shot. Gasps followed. The ivory fabric split along the seam, bearing a glimpse of her shoulder, her humiliation flaring crimson. Eleanor froze, breath caught somewhere between horror and disbelief. For a heartbeat, the ballroom seemed suspended in cruel delight. Then Nathaniel moved. Swift, decisive. Without a word, he unfastened the dark cloak from his shoulders and draped it over her, shielding her from every eye. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the force of rebellion. The room fell silent. Even the orchestra faltered. He turned to Lillian, his voice low but cutting. "Apologies, Miss Price. My cloak seems to have covered your amusement." Lillian paled. No one spoke. No one dared. Eleanor, her breath unsteady, managed to whisper, "You should not have intervened." "Then I should apologize for offending society," he murmured. "It has already offended you far worse." The words lingered, dangerous, tender. She could not bear to stay. With as much dignity as she could gather, she curtsied, murmured her thanks, and fled the floor. The Duke did not follow. He only watched as she crossed the glittering expanse, the hem of his cloak brushing marble like the last echo of chivalry. Outside, the night was rain-swept, cold, mercifully empty. Her carriage waited beneath the gaslight. She paused before stepping in, heart pounding with confusion, humiliation, and something dangerously close to gratitude. Inside the ballroom, laughter had already resumed, but softer now, uneasy, uncertain. A rumor was being rewritten. As the coachman closed the door, Eleanor glanced once more toward the great windows of Montrose Hall. Through the misted glass, she could just discern his silhouette near the doorway, still, watchful, apart. The rain blurred everything except that shape, tall, unyielding, haloed by candlelight. For reasons she could not name, her throat tightened. She pressed a hand to her chest, as though to calm the traitorous pulse beneath. The carriage jolted forward. The sound of hooves mingled with thunder. And somewhere behind her, in that gilded prison of music and masks, the Duke of Ashbourne stood beneath the chandeliers, watching her vanish into the rain, his cloak no longer on his shoulders, but wrapped around the woman who had, without meaning to, reminded him that even ruin could be beautiful. The violins began again, thin and mournful. The doors closed, yet the storm outside swelled, as if refusing to let the night end quietly. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt the faint, reckless ache of something she had sworn never to feel again. Hope. Morning in Somerset arrived, soft and gray, the kind of light that turned the world to watercolor. Lady Eleanor Harcourt stood by the window of her late father's study, the frost-veined glass dividing her from the misted grounds below. A week had passed since the ball at Montrose Hall, yet its echoes lingered, the torn gown, the Duke's cloak, the whispers that trailed her carriage like phantoms. London had a way of swallowing scandals whole, but in the countryside they lingered like damp in the walls. The Harcourt estate, once alive with callers and laughter, now stood in a hush of faded grandeur. The servants moved quietly, as though their very footsteps might disturb the fragile dignity their mistress wore like armor. Eleanor had written no letters, received none. Her mother's health had worsened, her brother remained conveniently abroad, and society had neatly folded her name away into the margins of gossip columns. She told herself she preferred it that way, that silence was safer than curiosity, but the lie tasted thin. On the third morning of her solitude, a knock came. A single envelope was brought to her on a silver tray, no seal, no signature. Inside, pressed between two pieces of parchment, lay a single violet, faintly wilted, but still fragrant. The accompanying note bore only 3 words, written in a bold, unfamiliar hand, "For courage always." She stared at it, the words almost absurd in their simplicity. For long, while she stood motionless, the violet trembling between her fingertips. Then, without reason she could name, she smiled, just once, small and disbelieving. By evening, she had placed the flower in a small porcelain dish beside her bed. Its scent filled the room like a secret. Days passed, the weather turned restless. Wind clawed at the eaves, rain whispered against the panes. And with each passing hour, she found herself thinking of that moment in the ballroom. The weight of his cloak on her shoulders, the look in his eyes as if he'd recognized something he had been searching for. She scolded herself for the thought, for the foolishness of hope. Yet hope, like rain, finds its way through even the smallest cracks. When the second letter came, she was in the garden, pruning roses gone wild. The gardener handed it to her, brow raised in curiosity. Again, no seal. But this time the handwriting she recognized, the firm, restrained script of the Duke of Ashbourne. Lady Harcourt, *, it was never my intention to wound your reputation further. I had hoped silence would suffice to protect you, yet silence has proved its own cruelty. I will say only this. You carried yourself that evening with a grace few could comprehend. It reminded me, for a fleeting moment, of what I once believed love to be. Forgive me for daring to write it, *N.G. Eleanor read it once, then again, her pulse unsteady. The words were not romantic in the ordinary sense. There was restraint in every line. Yet it was that restraint, the gentleness beneath it, that undid her. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her lips before tucking it away. For 2 nights she did not reply, but by the third, loneliness had grown unbearable. She took her place at the writing desk her father once used and began to write by candlelight. Your Grace, it is I who must ask forgiveness for allowing a kind gesture to become the subject of mockery. I thought myself beyond caring what the world believed, but I find I am still learning how to live without its approval. Your letter was not unkind. I thank you for it. She hesitated, then signed only E.H., sealing it before she could change her mind. The first exchange became 2, then 3. Weeks unfolded, and with them came a quiet rhythm, the rustle of parchment, the ink drying beneath her trembling hand. His letters grew longer, though never reckless. He wrote of duty and of exile, of how honor had become a language no one spoke fluently anymore. She answered with thoughts of solitude, of the small comforts she found in reading, in the roses that refused to bloom properly that season. Somewhere between confession and caution, affection took root. Each letter was a stolen breath between storms, and though neither dared to speak of meeting again, their words began to fill the silences the world had left them. It was Lillian Price who ruined it. Eleanor had gone to town for a brief visit, determined to prove she was unashamed. Lillian, radiant in silk the color of envy, greeted her with syruped civility. You look well, Eleanor, she said, eyes sharp. Country air suits you. I hear it inspires correspondence. Eleanor's heart faltered. I beg your pardon? Lillian's smile was poisonous. Only that your post seems quite consistent. I do hope you've chosen your confidant wisely. Letters have such a habit of wandering. That night, Eleanor could barely breathe. She tore through her writing desk, ensuring every letter was hidden. But one was missing. The most recent, the one she had not yet sent, in which she had written more boldly than ever before. I sometimes wonder whether it was courage or folly that made me meet your eyes that night. Panic seized her. Somewhere, somehow, that letter had been seen. 3 days later, confirmation arrived in the most brutal form, an anonymous column in the Morning Gazette. It is said a certain fallen lady in Somerset keeps her spirits by conversing, through ink and illusion, with a duke whose name modesty forbids us to print. How tenderly scandal dresses itself as sincerity, the word spread faster than fire. Servants whispered, neighbors withdrew, and even the local vicar began calling less frequently. Eleanor felt the walls of the estate tighten around her. The final letter came unsealed, delivered by the Duke's own hand. His script was darker this time, the lines more hurried. They have made our silence a spectacle. I will not let them ruin you further. I leave London at once. Let them say what they will of me. Your name must remain unspoken in their company. Forgive me this absence. It is the only shield I have left to offer you. Asterisk. She read it by the window as dusk bled into the sky. Her fingers trembled. The ink blurred with tears she refused to shed. The violet still sat in its porcelain dish, now brittle, its color fading to ash. She folded the letter once, pressing it to her heart. The world beyond the window blurred into rain. Somewhere, far away, a carriage was already departing, wheels splashing through mud, carrying with it the only person who had dared to see her without pity, and though she told herself it was for the best, that his leaving was mercy disguised as sacrifice, the silence that followed felt like exile renewed. When night fell, she lit every candle in the room, as if light could summon back what pride had driven away. She sat there until the flames burned low, until the ink on his letters shimmered like distant stars, until she could no longer tell whether the sound outside was the wind or a carriage returning through the storm. Rain had returned to Somerset, as if the heavens themselves had grown weary of silence. For months, Eleanor had lived like a ghost within the stone corridors of Harcourt Hall, letters locked away, curtains drawn against a world too cruel to forget. The scandal that once burned hot had cooled into something colder, quieter, more enduring. People no longer spoke her name. They avoided it, like one avoids the memory of a sin too close to home. But that morning, as mist pressed against the windows and the garden lay drowned in gray, a single message arrived. The handwriting, though hurried, was unmistakable. Asterisk, if you mean ever to know the truth of me, come before the world decides it for us both. N.G. Asterisk. The words trembled in her hands. She read them once, then again, feeling something break loose inside her, a fragile, foolish hope that refused to die. By evening, she had given orders for the carriage. She told her mother she was visiting an old friend. It was not quite a lie. The road to Ashbourne Manor was long and half-forgotten, winding through moors the color of tarnished silver. Clouds hung low, and the wind smelled of rain and iron. By the time she reached the Duke's estate, darkness had settled like a cloak over the hills. The manor rose from the mist, solemn and immense, its windows lit sparsely, like eyes half-shuttered against memory. She hesitated at the great doors, her courage faltering. What was she doing here? What answer could he give that would undo the ruin of their names? Yet she knocked all the same, because silence had become unbearable. The door opened to reveal a servant, grizzled, kind-eyed, as if he'd been waiting for her. His Grace expected you, he said, and she followed him through halls lined with portraits of men who had never needed to explain themselves. Nathaniel Grayston was standing by the hearth when she entered, the fire's glow touching the planes of his face. He did not turn immediately, though she knew he had heard her. When he finally faced her, the months of absence seemed to fall away, and yet there was distance, a gravity in his gaze that stilled her words before they formed. Lady Harcourt. His voice was softer than she remembered. You came. She swallowed. You asked me to. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his expression, relief, perhaps, or guilt. Then, I owe you honesty, he said, gesturing toward the fire. Sit, if you will. The room smelled of smoke and wet earth, the faint trace of cedar. She lowered herself into a chair, the flicker of flames catching the small tremor in her hands. He watched, then poured wine for them both. I thought I could protect you by leaving, he began. But I see now that absence only gives scandal room to grow. It feeds upon silence. Eleanor's lips curved bitterly. Silence has been my only ally. It keeps the pity out. Does it? He asked quietly. Or has it kept you from everything else? She said nothing. The truth of it hurt too much. He took a slow breath. You must think me a coward. I think, she said, that you are a man too accustomed to losing. He turned then, sharply. The fire threw light across the faint scar on his cheek. You've heard stories, no doubt, that I ran from war, that I left men behind. Some are true, some are lies, but the cost was the same. Her voice softened. You carry ghosts. So, do you, he replied. Yours just happen to whisper in drawing rooms instead of battlefields. The quiet between them deepened. Outside, wind rattled against the shutters. Eleanor's composure wavered. Her hands tightened in her lap. Do you ever tire of being judged by those who know nothing of you? His gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. Every day. Something within her broke then, a dam of restraint, of dignity. Then why leave me to bear it alone? Do you know what they've called me? What it means to be pitted as a woman who has lost everything except her pride? You think your silence noble, but it condemns me anew each day. Her voice cracked. He stepped closer, but she did not flinch. I thought if I removed myself, they would forget, he said softly, that you would be free to live unshadowed. Free, she whispered. You mistook loneliness for mercy, your grace. You left me to drown quietly while you convinced yourself it was salvation. His jaw tensed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he moved to the window, his hand braced against the glass. When I saw you that night, he said, his tone raw, I recognized something I had not seen in years, courage, and it terrified me. I am not a man meant to love gently, Lady Harcourt. The things I carry do not permit it. She rose from her chair, the firelight gilding her pale face. And I am not a woman built to be loved safely. He turned then, their eyes met, and the distance between them felt suddenly unbearable. She took a hesitant step forward. I left London because I felt myself falling, and I thought love would destroy what little of me remained. I thought dignity was the only thing I could keep, but it seems I've lost that too. He moved toward her, each step slow, deliberate. When he stopped, they stood so near she could see the pulse at his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was scarcely above a whisper. If love is ruin, then let us be ruins together. The words hung between them, fragile, perilous. She felt his hand lift, hesitant, trembling, and brush against her cheek. It was not a lover's claim, but a question, a plea for permission. She did not move away. Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm broke, rain lashing against the windows like applause from the heavens. For a moment, they stood in the hush between heartbeats, the air alive with things neither dared to name. Her tears fell silently. His thumb caught one as it traced her skin. Eleanor, he said, her name breaking on his breath like confession. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. You should not have written to me. I know. You should not have left. I know, he said again. And yet you did. He closed his eyes briefly, as though her words were a blade he accepted willingly. And yet you came. The clock struck once, a low, solemn sound that seemed to shake the walls. The fire flared, shadows dancing across their faces. Whatever might have followed was broken by a sudden, urgent knock at the door. The servant entered, breathless. A messenger from London, your grace. It is urgent. Nathaniel stepped back, the spell dissolving like mist. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears as he unfolded the letter handed to him. His eyes darkened as he read. What is it, she asked. He looked up, the weight of the world in his voice. Sir Alistair Vane has brought new charges. He claims you sought to ensnare me for your own advantage, that you forged my letters. Eleanor went still, her breath leaving her in one broken gasp. The fire hissed, the rain intensified, and between them hung a silence thicker than before. Finally, Nathaniel spoke again. Quiet, dangerous. They mean to destroy you, Eleanor. She met his gaze, her expression trembling between fear and defiance. Then they shall learn, she said, how difficult I am to destroy. Outside, lightning tore the sky, open, flooding the room in white. And in that moment, with the storm raging around them, neither spoke again, because they both understood what would come next. Beneath the ink-black heavens, Grosvenor Square lay cloaked in stormlight. Rain came in furious slants, drumming upon the carriages, slashing across marble steps, and soaking the cobblestones until they gleamed like mirrors to the night. Inside the grand townhouse of the Ashworths, candles quivered in their sconces, their delicate flames trembling against the roar outside. The world, it seemed, held its breath, as if all of London knew that within those walls, something fragile and forbidden was about to shatter. Evelyn stood before the tall windows, her reflection a ghost in the storm. Her gown of palest blue silk clung to her like sorrow. Her hair had loosened from its pins, curling darkly against her neck. The letter she had written, the one never meant to be seen, burned in her mind like a sin recited too often. The Duke of Hawthorne had returned her silence these past 3 weeks, and though her days had been filled with chatter and charity, her nights were consumed by his absence. Tonight, she told herself, would be her last act of courage or her final disgrace. The doors burst open. Wind and thunder entered together, and with them, the Duke stood in the hall, drenched to the bone, his dark hair slicked back, his greatcoat heavy with rain. The servants hesitated at the sight of him, but he waved them away. His eyes, those storm-gray depths that once softened at her laughter, were now shadowed and unrelenting. "You should not have come," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling like the candlelight. "Nor should you have written," he replied, stepping closer, his boots leaving trails of water on the polished floor. "But you did." His words cut through the air with the precision of a blade. Evelyn turned away, clutching the folds of her gown as though fabric alone could shield her from consequence. "I meant only to free myself from—" "From what?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous, almost breaking. "From the truth? Or from the thought of what they would say if they knew you cared for a man ruined by scandal?" Evelyn flinched. Outside, thunder cracked like the earth itself had taken offense. "You mistake pity for affection," she said, though her voice faltered on a lie. "Pity," he echoed, his jaw tightening. "Then pity has learned to tremble when I draw near, has it?" She turned to him then, truly looked at him, and the sight tore at her composure. His cravat hung loose, his shirt clung to him, and his hands, usually so still, clenched as though holding back the ruin of all restraint. "You have already been condemned by society," she said softly. "If they learn you sought me out again." He took another step forward. "Let them condemn me twice. I am already guilty, Evelyn, guilty of wanting you." Her breath caught. The words were not a declaration, they were an undoing. He reached into his coat and produced something small and worn. A velvet ribbon, torn, frayed, yet unmistakably hers. "I kept it," he said quietly, his voice roughened by rain and memory. "The night you dropped it at Lord Pembroke's ball. I thought it foolish sentiment. Now I see it was the only truth I ever possessed." Her composure wavered, her fingers trembling at her side. "You should not speak this way," she murmured, her tone collapsing under the weight of everything unsaid. "And you should not pretend you feel nothing," he answered. "You wrote to me, Evelyn. You confessed what you dare not say aloud. Every word of that letter lives in me still." The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. Her eyes filled, and for a moment, pride warred with longing. "If I had known it would reach you, you would have written it still," he finished, "because you needed to, because you could no longer breathe beneath the weight of what you denied." Evelyn's hand went to her throat. The tears she had restrained for weeks now glimmered like pearls upon her lashes. "And what has it brought us?" she whispered. "My reputation lies in shreds. Your name, already dragged through mud, now tied to mine. The city feasts upon our ruin." He moved to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath against her chilled skin. "Let them feast. I will not starve myself of truth for their amusement." Her lips parted. A protest, a plea, but he caught her hand, his grip firm, reverent. For the first time, she did not pull away. The silence between them was the kind only souls carved from the same ache could share. "I would rather be despised with you," he said softly, "than adored without you." Something in her broke then, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, like frost yielding to dawn. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You cannot say such things. I already have." The rain battered the windows as if the heavens demanded witness. For one suspended heartbeat, he bent his head closer, not enough to claim her lips, but enough that she could feel the tremor of his restraint. The nearness was unbearable, sacred. "Tell me," he breathed, "that I am not alone in this." Her voice was a fragile thread. "You are not alone." The admission hung between them, trembling like a secret too pure for the world beyond those walls. Then a sound from the corridor, the clatter of a servant's gasp, the hurried retreat of footsteps. The spell shattered. Evelyn pulled her hand from his grasp, horror flooding her face. "They will tell," she said, stepping back. "By morning, every drawing room in London will know." "Let them know," he replied fiercely. "I will not hide what I feel." "You must," she insisted, "for both our sakes." Lightning tore across the sky, flooding the room with white brilliance. And in that instant, she saw the truth of him. A man worn not by pride, but by love restrained too long. He looked at her as if the world outside had ceased to exist. "If this is ruin," he said, "then let it be glorious." And before she could speak, before the weight of consequence could return, he was gone, vanishing into the storm he had come from, leaving only the echo of his vow and the sound of her name lingering in the rain. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The fire sputtered, candles flickered, and the house seemed to exhale the memory of him. Outside, the Duke's carriage wheels splashed through the flooded streets, the horses crying against the thunder's rage. She turned back to the window, and there across the square, through the blur of rain, she saw him once more. He had dismounted, looking up at her window, his figure outlined by lightning's flash. For one heartbeat, the world held still, the storm, the city, the ache between them, frozen in electric silence. Then he mounted again and was gone into the dark, leaving her breathless, trembling, and aware that her life, as she had known it, had just been torn in two. And somewhere in the heart of that storm, her name still echoed, a promise unanswered. The rain had not ceased in 3 days. London lay drowned beneath it, carriages half submerged in the slush, gaslights dimmed by sheets of water. The city's pulse slowed to a steady, mournful rhythm. Grosvenor Square, once the heart of all whispered glitter and gossip, now stood emptied of laughter. Behind the heavy curtains of number 16, Evelyn sat motionless, her gaze fixed upon the carriage clock that had marked every lonely hour since that night. It was nearing midnight. The fire had burned low, casting amber halos upon her pale face. Her hands, clasped in her lap, trembled from a battle she could no longer name. Pride against longing, reputation against ruin. The letter she had written days ago, sealing the end of it all, lay unsent on the mantelpiece. Every word in it had felt like a blade pressed to her own heart. Asterisk, you must not return. What remains between us belongs to silence. Asterisk, and yet, silence had become unbearable. Outside, the storm deepened. Wind flung raindrops against the windows with the fury of an unheeded messenger. Somewhere far down the street, the echo of hooves broke through the noise, slow at first, then deliberate, relentless. Evelyn rose, her pulse quickening. The sound drew closer, stopping directly before the house. A knock followed, firm, insistent, and impossibly familiar. Her maid appeared in the doorway, pale with disbelief. "Your Grace," she whispered, "it is the Duke." Evelyn's breath caught. For a single trembling moment she thought to refuse him, to let the night and the storm take him back to wherever broken men hide their hearts. But something stronger than fear, older than propriety, pulled her forward. When she opened the door, the wind howled through the entrance, scattering papers and candlelight alike. He stood upon the threshold, drenched once more, his dark coat clinging to him, his expression carved from exhaustion and resolve. "I was told you would not receive me," he said, his voice hoarse, his gaze searching hers as though the world existed only in her eyes. "I should not," she replied softly, the edges of her composure fraying. "Then do not," he said, stepping inside, "but hear me." The door closed behind him with a heavy finality. The storm raged beyond, but inside there was only the sound of their uneven breaths. He moved closer, not out of arrogance, but out of desperation. "They have begun to circle you, Evelyn. Every dinner table, every whisper at Almack's. They say I ruined you, that you were seen at the window the night I left." Her chin lifted, defiant though her voice trembled. "And what is it you intend to do? Challenge the wind for carrying their words?" "No," he said. "Marry you." The world seemed to tilt, the thunder outside swallowed by the silence that followed. Evelyn stared at him, at the man society had named a scandal, the man she had once fled to preserve her name. "You cannot mean this," she murmured. "I have never meant anything more," he replied. "Let them curse me, strip me of title and fortune if they wish, but they will not have your name sullied on my account." "You speak as though marriage were a shield," she said bitterly. "It would destroy us both." He smiled faintly, a broken, beautiful thing. "Perhaps destruction is the only honest thing left." She turned from him, her hands pressing against the banister to steady herself. "You do not understand. I would rather live in disgrace alone than chain you to my ruin." "Then you misunderstand me," he said, stepping closer until his voice trembled just behind her ear. "It is not rescue I offer. It is surrender. I am done fighting what I have already lost to you." Her breath hitched. And what of love built upon scandal? Better scandal than emptiness. She turned then, too quickly, too fiercely, and met his eyes. There was something raw there, something that made her chest ache with the weight of unspoken years. "You would face the world for me?" "I already have," he said, "but it seems the world will not be silenced until I prove it." Before she could answer, another sound filled the hall, the sharp, insistent clatter of a carriage stopping just beyond the door. She froze. He turned toward the sound, brow furrowing. Moments later, a servant stumbled in, soaked and wide-eyed. "My lady, it is Lord Ashworth. He demands audience." Her brother, the guardian of her reputation, the man who had already sworn that if the Duke ever darkened their threshold again, he would see him ruined beyond repair. The Duke looked to her, calm but resolute. "Then let him come." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "Please," she whispered, stepping closer, "if he finds you here." "It ends tonight," he said, "one way or another." The door flung open with a violent gust. Lord Ashworth stormed in, his face white with fury. "You dare," he thundered, "after dragging my sister's name through filth, you come to her house in the dead of night?" Evelyn stepped between them, her hands raised. "Please, Edward." "Silence, Evelyn," he barked. His gaze turned to the Duke, cold and contemptuous. "You have destroyed enough. Leave now, before I forget my restraint." The Duke did not flinch. "You may call me what you will," he said evenly, "but you will not speak to her as though she is yours to command." The air thickened. For a moment, it seemed one more word would shatter them all. Evelyn, trembling, moved forward. "Edward, you cannot protect me from this. I chose." "Chose," he interrupted. "Chose disgrace." "No," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "Chose truth." The Duke's eyes met hers, and the storm outside seemed to still. Lord Ashworth turned away, disgust and disbelief warring across his face. "Then you are both mad," he said coldly. "Do as you will. But when society shuts its doors, do not come to me for mercy." He left without another glance. The door slammed, and with it the last echo of the life Evelyn had once known. For a long moment there was only the sound of the rain. Softer now, almost forgiving, the Duke exhaled shakily. "You should hate me for this." She shook her head, tears glistening like diamonds in the firelight. "I did, until I realized I could not." He reached for her hand, hesitant, reverent. She let him. Outside, the carriage that had brought him still waited, its lantern casting a soft, golden halo upon the rain-slicked street. He looked toward it, then back to her. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Not as scandal, not as salvation, simply as yourself." Her heart ached with every rule she was breaking, every promise she could no longer keep. But when she looked at him, she saw not ruin, only the impossible tenderness of a man who had weathered every storm and still chosen her. Evelyn lifted her chin. "Then let us go." He led her out into the rain, helping her into the carriage as though she were something sacred. The horses stirred, hooves splashing in the puddles. As they pulled away, London blurred behind them. The lights, the judgment, the past. Inside, their hands found each other's in silence. The rain struck the roof like a heartbeat. She looked at him, the man she once feared to love, and for the first time did not feel ashamed. He turned toward her, eyes soft beneath the dim glow. "Whatever waits beyond this night," he said, "we face it together." And as the carriage rolled into the endless rain, Evelyn leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, the storm fading into something gentler, not an ending, but a beginning born from ruin and defiance.